Welcome back to Tell Your Story Alaska. Thank you for being patient with me while I was on a bit of a hiatus from making episodes. I was able to head on south to Tennessee to visit some family down there, and it was just a well-needed break. We actually got really sick while we were there, and so we were able to just kind of hang out there and recover from sickness in a different place. And it was really nice to see family, and we went on some hikes and anyway, got to see a different part of the country. It was nice to get out of Alaska for a little bit, and it's also nice to come back to Alaska. Although the really weird thing is that it's unusually warm right now. Like, all the snow is melting. There's pooled water everywhere. The roads are icy. We've had like some sort of snow/rain here, and it's actually warmer here in Alaska than it was in Tennessee. In fact, down there, it's like even in the negatives. And as I sit now, it's 35 degrees. It's very bizarre weather right now in Alaska. And my family is just recovering from sickness and the weird weather. And the sun's actually popping out now, but it's been really gloomy. This is like the time of year when we hunker down because usually it's cold and cloudy and gloomy and the trees kind of look dead. It's sort of a sad time of year, but now that the sun's popping out, even as I speak, it's becoming quickly more pleasant. Well, anyway, I digress. It is really nice to be back home after seeing some family and being away for a bit. Being back home in Alaska is still wonderful. Back in my office, my wood stove, my bed. It's great to be home. Well, today we're going to be covering the next two villages in our list, which is Bettles and Big Delta. Bettles and Big Delta. Now, when I'll get to this when I get to Big Delta, but I ended up going down some rabbit holes I will mention, but I'm not going to go down them with you. Maybe other episodes it will produce. But let's start with Bettles, Alaska. The name Bettles sounds like beetle. It's like, what is this name? Well, it actually comes from a guy named Gordon C. Bettles. He's from Montana. Gordon C. Bettles was a newspaper man and a Montana silver prospector. He decided to try his luck in Alaska during the 1899 gold rush. He opened and operated a trading post in what is now called Old Bettles in 1898. So this community is not ancient. It's not, an old site of a native community. And I've been finding it fascinating that many of the modern villages are this way. A lot of them really popped up around this time, the late 1800s. Some of them go back to the Russians, like Belkovsky, we talked about last time. But really, I've been thinking about this lately. The population of Alaska was, pre-contact was maybe 30,000. Really not a lot of people compared to the perhaps some estimates are like at the time of contact with Columbus in 1492, there may have been 54 million Native Americans in the Americas. In Alaska, a few hundred years later, at contact with the Russians was maybe around 30,000. So really a small group of people, relatively speaking, probably because it takes a tough soul to live in Alaska year-round without the modern amenities, which is what they did. But anyway, Bettles started from a guy who took advantage of the gold rush in the late 1800s, and he started a little store on that spot because a lot of gold prospectors were heading through there. Now, I did find an old photo of this post that Gordon C. Bettles started. It's a long white building up on stilts, which sits right on the river's edge. And in this photo, you can see wooden boats parked down at the bank. So it's a spot where people would stop to resupply and get a night's rest. Located at Old Bettles, which is 7 miles from the present community of Bettles. And it was the northern terminal of the Koyukuk River Barge Line, one of those old companies. A post office was in Old Bettles from 1901 to 1956. The new Bettles site came along because the FAA constructed an airfield and a communications installation in 1948, which was used by the U.S. Navy for exploring National Petroleum Reserve Number 4. This opened up work opportunities and brought in native people and white people to work this airfield. This airstrip led residents to migrate to the airstrip for access to resources. Now, you can still see old Bettles on Google Earth. You can still see some photos of some of the cabins and buildings that were there. They are nestled up against the Koyukuk River near the confluence of the John River. So it's kind of fun to go on Google Earth and look at that. Now, in the last episode, we discussed Belkovsky, which is an abandoned village. Just a lot of rotting buildings are all that's left there. Now, Bettles was not really abandoned. However, it did move. So it's not like the village faded. It's more like it just moved because of the airstrip. Now, despite Evansville, which is the neighboring village, Bettles and Evansville are kind of butted up next to each other, and they both use that airstrip. It's still considered two distinct villages. So when we get to Evansville, a lot of the history will be quite similar. So the two villages sit together there. Now, the populations and demographics of Bettles, we have a population of 23 people as of 2020, so a very small village, but 23 is up from 12, which was in 2010. So the village of Bettles has doubled in size. Bettles is about 3/4 white and about 1/4 Native Alaskan. The highest temperature ever recorded in Bettles was 93 degrees. That was in 1986. The lowest temperature recorded was -70 degrees Fahrenheit in 1975. I'm still amazed at the temperature swings in these places. It's pretty amazing. I didn't do the math on that. What is that? 180 degree swing or something? That's amazing. Wow. Bettles sits near the confluence of the John and Koyukuk rivers. The John River is notable for its 96 historic and archaeological sites, including old villages, house remains, game drive blinds, caches, and stone tools. I thought that was fascinating. I wish I could have found more on those archaeological sites. I love archaeological stuff. I kind of go down those bunny trails, but there wasn't a whole lot that I could find on it. This area appears to be the ancient lands of Athabaskan Inuit cultures, sort of like a confluence of the two cultures is in this area. It is a major route for caribou migrations, making it an important area historically as hunting grounds for Native Alaskans into the unknown past. The John River winds through the Brooks Range, which is known as the Anaktuvuk Pass, which is another village we've already covered. But it's also the name of a pass, which is the John River winds through there. It is inside the gates of the Arctic National Park and Preserve. This pass is an outdoorsman's paradise because of the river's unusually low terrain and high, steep valley walls. Makes for an awe-inspiring views. This is actually a fairly popular canoe trip you can make. Adventurers enjoy a relatively safe river to paddle down with rewarding views. The most popular canoe trip or kayak trip is a 100-mile, 7-day canoe ride from Anaktuvuk Pass to Bettles. So you'll end up in Bettles. And there's various aviation services and outfitters that will help you do that. That sounds like it would be an amazing 7-day trip. It reminds me of growing up going to like the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota. My family would go up there with our canoes and our tents, and you just head out into the wilderness and enjoy it. And of course, this is similar to that, but I think without the portages. And from what I read, I think it said it was like a class 3. I'm a bit naive about these classifications, but basically it was saying it's a relatively easy canoe trip. It's a moderate in difficulty, and it just sounds like a beautiful place to traverse. All right, today the Dalton Highway formerly known as the Hickle Highway, is the nearest road to Bettles. So Bettles is an off-road village. However, it's about 25 miles from the Dalton Highway as the bird flies. The 414-mile-long highway runs from Livingood to Dead Horse. It is one of the world's most northernmost and most isolated roads in the United States. The original road was opened by Governor Walter J. Hickle in 1966, but poor engineering led to its destruction because of underlying permafrost thawing out, and the road fell apart and it was ultimately abandoned. However, the road was revived in 1974 by James W. Dalton, who bears the name of the highway today. James W. Dalton was a lifelong Alaskan engineer. I have a special place in my heart for engineers because my brother is a successful engineer, and also my father is a retired nuclear engineer. And so I come from an engineering family, and I got engineering blood in me. I love watching like YouTube engineering videos. And of course, the Dalton Highway is one of those engineering marvels because of the terrain it traverses. So pretty interesting history in this highway. Anyway, James W. Dalton supervised the construction of the Dalton Highway to support the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System in 1974. This highway was the subject of an episode of America's Toughest Jobs. It was also featured in Ice Road Truckers, and it was on BBC's World's Most Dangerous Roads. 3/4 of the road is gravel, and 1/4 of it is paved. Although I did read something, they're trying to pave more and more of it every year. Seems like they're making progress. There does appear to be a winter-only trail from the Dalton Highway to Bettles, and this is why I brought up the Dalton Highway, Alaska Highway 11, is that there is a winter-only road, or trail, you could say, that goes from the Dalton Highway to Bettles. It does cross the Jim River and then lots of mushy tundra, so it's only passable during the wintertime. Now, I did, going down this bunny trail, there are people, some forums asking, like, can I do it in the summertime? And the responses to that were, you legally can, but it's not advised. Obviously, tundra is very soft ground. You will probably get stuck. But in the wintertime, when it's frozen, it looks like there's even relatively large trucks that make the journey from the Dalton Highway to Bettles to bring in supplies in the winter. So if you can imagine, that's part of the Bettles culture, and Evansville in turn. You can imagine how crazy that would be, is to traverse across this tundra, which is lakes and rivers, in the wintertime with a truck to get your supplies in. It's really an unbelievable part of the life in Bettles, which I have not been to, but I have friends that have been there. All right. The friends that I have been there are part of a ministry called Kingdom Air Corp. Now, I did interview Dwayne King and Joe Gerwig, who run Kingdom Air Corp, and they are very familiar with Bettles. Now, Kingdom Air Corp is a flight school. You can go back and check out that episode. Some episodes back. It is located near Chickaloon, Alaska, at a place called King's Ranch, and they also have a hangar in Palmer. But they're a flight school to get you from, no license up to commercial. But they also run a camp during the summer as part of their program called the Brooks Range Bible Camp, which is just north of Bettles. Now, Brooks Range Bible Camp originated in Bettles in 1978 by some Christian missionaries. I believe Dwayne King, who runs Kingdom Air Corp, had played a heavy role in that as well. Now, later, Brooks Range Bible Camp moved to a small restricted airstrip called Crevice Creek, which is where it is today. And even today, this ministry still goes there every year and runs a small Bible camp. They use Bettles at times to stop for fuel on their journey north. And I know just last year, some of my friends who did this, they landed in Bettles because of weather, and they were stuck there for a few days. So certainly they are thankful for Gordon C. Bettles, who put a shop there up many years ago. And in turn, a village popped up, and they had a place to land and wait out the weather. The camp continues to operate for kids in villages such as Alakakit, Alatna, Anaktuvuk Pass, Hughes, Wiseman, Coldfoot, and Arctic Village. The kids get flown in by Kingdom Air Corps' experienced pilots. Sometimes I know their students go along on those flights, but they fly in, and the students of Kingdom Air Corps run, I think it goes for like 2 weeks. They run a kids camp there, and the kids from these various villages get to hear the gospel. So that's pretty cool. And Bettles is where that camp started. All right, I checked out Bettles on my flight. On my flight, the airstrip at Bettles reports to be a gravel airstrip. Like I said, I have not been here. That's why I had to look it up. The elevation is 647 feet, which is actually kind of high for Alaska airstrips. But it does make sense because it's near the base of the Brooks Range. It's 5,190 feet long. There's even a float plane access. You can land on a lake nearby down to the southeast if you have a float plane. ForeFlight reports that there's a place called Bettles Lodge and Brooks Range Aviation are noted FBOs at the Bettles Airport. Obviously, Bettles, even though it's only a population of 23, it will have a tourist industry there. Bettles also has an RNAV and VOR approach. So while VORs are becoming obsolete, I'm still thankful they're there because we need these VORs. There's a handful of them scattered throughout that vast land out there. They're helpful because the GPS will go out sometimes. I've had plenty of times where my GPS signal just goes away for some time. Usually never more than like 10 minutes or so, and it'll come back. But I do know they were doing, the U.S. military was doing testing on the GPS system. I'm not sure exactly what they were doing, but they did shut down the GPS signal in this area. And so our heavy reliance on GPS, still perhaps we need to know how to do data reckoning and the use of systems like VORs, which there is one in Bettles, and those can be real lifesavers. All right, so that's enough on Bettles. Let's talk about the next one on our list called Big Delta. Now, Big Delta sits in an area, let's see, it's just south of Fairbanks, a little bit south and a little bit east of Fairbanks, and sits right next to Delta Junction, a larger community. And so the history of Big Delta and Delta Junction are going to overlap quite a bit. But today we're on Big Delta, so we'll let them overlap because it's my show and I'm going to do what I want. Big Delta is located at the junction of the Delta and Tanana rivers on the Richardson Highway. So it is on the road system, unlike Bettles. Big Delta and Delta Junction appear to be tightly knit together. However, today's community is Big Delta. So, okay, the oral history and a substantial number of native names for places in the area suggest that Tanana Athabaskan Indians occupied this site throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. However, Alaska Native Indians began to leave the site between 1898 and 1903 during the gold rush. Man, this gold rush comes up in almost all the histories of the villages. It's like the gold rush affected everything. Really was a pivotal time, was the finding of gold in Alaska. I think probably other huge pivotal thing in Alaska, obviously when the Russians discovered it, when America bought it. But then there's the gold rush, and there's also World War II, and then statehood. Anyway, there have been archaeological remains of hunted bison remains found in the area. So that's interesting. It does seem like historically the Athabaskan Indians hunted bison in the ancient past in this area. Now in 1899, the Army wanted to investigate this area of Alaska, and they did. They wanted to determine the best route from Valdez to Eagle City. By 1901, the Trans-Alaska Military Road had been constructed. In 1902, gold was discovered in the Tanana Valley, which led to the creation of the Spur Trail from Golconda to a mining camp in Fairbanks. This became known as the Valdez-Fairbanks Trail. Now, there's a man named, he's called Prospector Ben Bennett, Now, what's coming is like this crazy series of names. I'm surprised at how detailed it is, and I'm just going to whip through it. But it is where this village comes from. So here we go. Prospector Ben Bennett staked out 80 acres and built a trading post at Big Delta on the Tanana River. He sold his post in 1905 to Daniel G. McCarty. Now, that McCarty name still continues today. We'll get there. The trading post and roadhouse become known as McCarty's Station, and which became the WAMCAT Station. Now, what is WAMCATs? WAMCAT stands for Washington, Alaska Military Cable and Telegraph System. And you know how the military love acronyms. And so, of course, WAMCATs, when you make that an acronym. In 1900, it took a year to send a message from the interior of Alaska to Washington, D.C. Imagine that, a year with our emails taking 5 seconds to get there. Now they took a year. In response to this really long communication system, in 1903, the famous Billy Mitchell constructed a telegraph line from Eagle to the mouth of the Good Pastor River as part of the WAMCAT's system. Now, the Good Pastor Station was destroyed in 1904 and 1905, and it was relocated to Big Delta at McCarty's property. Now, today, McCarty's is now called McCarty's Station, and it is a museum. So you can go there and visit that as sort of a historical place, known as the place where this WAMCAT system was based. Now, another historical spot in Big Delta is a place called Rita's Roadhouse. Now, Rita was not the original owner. This, again, is a series of names. A prospector named Alonzo Maxey and a partner set up Bradley's Roadhouse. And he set that up to compete with McCarty. By 1907, Alonzo obtained McCarty's, and then sometime after 1912, a man named John Hadjukovic, I hope I pronounced that right, Hadjukovic. He took over and he built a bigger roadhouse. Then in 1817, Hadjukovic hired a Swedish immigrant named Rita Wallen to operate the roadhouse. Then in 1823, Wallen acquired the roadhouse from Hadjukovic for the price of $10. Today, Rita's Roadhouse is a part of Big Delta's historical park. Wait, is it Rita's or Rika's? Hang on. I'm pausing this and looking it up. I got to get it right. Okay, I actually paused the recording because I had to look this up. In my notes, I have, and some of it says Rita's and some of it says Rika's. And I had to confirm it is Rika's Roadhouse. It is now a part of Big Delta's historical park, and you can visit that. It's kind of a museum now, a notable place for that community. Another part of this community was that in 1919, a work camp was established for the construction of the Richardson Highway, which goes from Valdez to Fairbanks. And this contributed to the growth of this community. In 1942 and 43, the construction of the Alaska Highway contributed to more homesteading in Big Delta. Between 1974 and 77, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline was constructed, which brought in more development into the area. So some of these big projects aided the growth of this community. Now today, this was an interesting thing about Big Delta, and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but this might be a deep one. We'll see. Today, residents are members of Whitestone Farms, which is also connected to something called the Church of the Living Word. Now, it says that this group pools their assets and incomes. It's a successful, profitable business, and they pool their assets and income for the good of the community. For example, they've constructed a school, a YMCA, and a visitor center are now communal facilities. I had a hard time to find other information about this group. There is like a Facebook group called Whitestone Farms. It looks like a really nice, successful farm raising cows and beef and things like that. There's some references to it being a school, and it looks like there's also a church. Now, it's a little bit elusive because it was hard to find any information about this place. But one of the sort of, when you do a Google search, you have to like, go past the first page, go down to like page 10 and stuff like that. If you do go that far, there are some forums that connect this place to a cult called quote unquote The Move, which was founded by Sam Fife back in the 1970s. Now, I have to be really careful here because I'm not saying that it's definitely a cult. It's just on some of the forums I found, they connect this community with the Move cult in Big Delta. Now, there's only mentions, I don't really know, but it does, of course, spark my curiosity. But I suspect, like most things, the truth is very complicated and nuanced. And no matter what I say, whoever is listening, based on their perspective, will say that it's wrong. So I'm only mentioning what I found in some online mentions. And it is a little odd that I couldn't find very much information about this. Now, I do have some friends who tell me that Big Delta, Delta Junction is a very Christian community, very community-based where they share resources, very successful in business and endeavors such as that. And that's the sort of community it is. But I do not know much more than that. So I say those things with caution about some cult activity. So in order to finish this podcast, I really had to slam on the brakes on this bunny trail so that I could actually record this. But my curiosity will likely get the better of me, and I will go down that trail later. I do sort of have a fascination with cults. So I'm going to leave it there for now. You can, however, go on the Whitestone Farms website. They have a podcast, and I clicked on one, and it seems like it is weekly sermons from their church that you can listen to. I was able to find that this group started from a church group from New Hampshire looking for a homestead to buy to start a new community, which was back in 1982. And they became known as the community of Whitestone. All right, one last thing to mention about Big Delta is a place called the Pogo Mine. The Pogo Mine is a gold mine operated from 2006 to 2022 by a company called North Star. At their peak, they employed 610 people, but most of the time it was more like 300. The mine was said to produce around 400,000 ounces of gold per year. Now, different articles said different amounts. This one said 400,000 ounces of gold per year. I looked up how much that is worth in US dollars. If you do the conversion at the current, here we are in 2025. So it's the current value of gold now. I don't know what it was over the years in its operation, but 400,000 ounces of gold is over $1 billion of gold. And so this place, even if the numbers varied year to year, it was producing. So it probably made this area quite wealthy. So there's no question why this place continued to operate almost a decade beyond its planned operation time. I think it was supposed to go for about 10 years, ended up going for, 18 years? And it looks like the mine is now shut down. The mine was controversial. It was one of the largest mining waste producers in Alaska and one of the largest mercury polluters in the country. So as you can imagine, all the legal noise that would have surrounded that place. But regardless, you can see there's a Pogo Mine airstrip that I've actually, before I knew about in this podcast, because I have a hobby of looking for airstrips, and I found that one. It'd be interesting to go there and see all the old mining stuff there. Just probably that were left there. Well, anyway, that's all I have for Big Delta. The last thing was the Pogo Mine. But we will be later getting to Delta Junction because that's in the D's. And Delta Junction is the larger community nearby. So maybe by then I will have learned some more about this community and this area. And I'm almost certainly go deeper into what this community is like. I do have friends that have been there and that speak very highly of the community. And then there's also these rumors of cultish activity. So that sparks my interest a bit. All right, so that's it for today for Big Delta and Bettles, Alaska. Next week, we will be covering a place called Bill Moore's Slough. And the name intrigued me. I had to do a quick search before I wrapped up this episode. Bill Moore's Slough is basically a part of Kotlik, Alaska. I do know some people in Kotlik. And it's just sort of on the very end of the community. It's just it's a very unique name. So that'll be interesting. There's only a few people that live there, but it's just, it's called Bill Moore's Slough. So who's Bill Moore and why is it right next to Kotlik? We will get into that. The other village is Big Lake, Alaska. And Big Lake is, I don't live in Big Lake, but I live very, very near Big Lake. And my airplanes are at Big Lake Airport. So getting really close to home now with Big Lake next week. So that's it for today. Thank you guys for allowing me to take a little hiatus with my trip to see family down in Tennessee. I am now back in Alaska, recovering from sickness, and I will be hitting the ground running for more episodes. I do have some very interesting interviews. Hopefully it worked out. It's really hard to plan interviews because people have busy lives, and you have to work around that. And a handful of them have unfortunately fallen through. But I am hopeful that I will have some very interesting interviews with people with very fascinating life stories coming to you soon. But if not this week, next week, I will see you and we'll talk about Bill Moore's Slough and Big Lake, Alaska. We'll see you then. Thanks for tuning in to Tell Your Story, Alaska.